Hello and welcome back to Cyber Live, Tech London, for our panel discussion on the future of cybersecurity. I hope you've all enjoyed a good lunch and a networking break and that you feel ready for another session. So joining me on the stage today are two eminent experts in the cybersecurity space. We have Andrzej Kawalec, who is the head of cybersecurity for Vodafone Business. Welcome, Andrzej. And we also have Lesley Kipling, who is the Chief Security Advisor for Microsoft. Welcome back, Lesley.
Hi. Microphone.
Okay. Is the microphone working? Yeah? Okay.
Testing.
Okay. So first of all, Lesley, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the audience at home?
Sure, can do. So, as Joanna said, Chief Security Advisor for Microsoft, but that was not my past. Been at Microsoft for 21 years, but the vast majority of that has been doing incident response, both internally and externally for our customers. So I like to say that I'm not institutionalized, but I'm polarized, right? Prior to that, though, came from Africa, was a geologist, chief chemist on the mines out there, and I think that was the first time I saw people trying to do very interesting things in terms of trying to steal stuff, right? And when you think about the human psyche, you can take it from the physical to the digital world, right? So yeah, came up through the ranks, did mention that I had to kill a few people on the way, but that was okay, really. Thank you.
Okay. And Andrzej, can we hear a little bit about you, please?
Of course, yeah. I think we're okay.
Oh, you have not? Okay.
Yeah, I got the short straw.
So yeah, I run security for Vodafone Business and look after sort of all of our business customers and 300 million consumers around the world. Previously spent 10, 15 years as global CTO at HP, ran the security research program, advised a number of governments and NATO, and just fascinating how that polarization has played out through the years. And I feel quite privileged that the rest of the world has slowly caught up and talking about cyber, and those of us who have been standing up talking about it for sort of 20 years or more, finally, I think, reaching some degree of mass appeal and recognition, which is a really awesome thing for all of us.
Yeah. So today we're talking about the future of cybersecurity at a time when the challenges have really never been so huge for the industry. And the human element is obviously a big part of that. In terms of sort of plugging the gaps, Andrzej, what can the average Joe do to protect themselves? If we start off small and then move on to more businessy questions.
Yeah, and I think actually starting small is the place to start and end, because I think all of those sort of big global macro sort of trends we think about actually come down to moments when people do things. They try to buy something, they try to get. They book an appointment, book a hospital procedure. They try to connect or talk to somebody, and it's in those micro moments that I think most often the average person is being let down. And I think they bring it on, we bring it on ourselves, because we are both very poor at making risk-based decisions on our own. We cross the road when we shouldn't. We don't always look both ways. And there's been a wholesale transition from an analog-first world where we just do things physically or did things physically first to almost a digitally first world. And that happened through the pandemic, right? 10 years adoption of technology in 10 sort of weeks or months is something we talk about. And I think that means that actually everything we've relied on before for trust isn't actually the go-to. I mean, imagine if the fire alarm went off for us all today, intuitively we'd know what to do. Yeah, we would feel empowered to break the glass, to light or cause the alarm. We could do that if we saw or smelt smoke or fire. We would follow somebody wearing a jacket out of the room. There are signs everywhere to follow. We would get somewhere. We would be told to wait, often in a rainy car park, until the coast was clear. We would also know intuitively to grab our most valuable things, not everything. We would know not to use the elevator, but to go down the stairs, right? All of that stuff has been trained into us from being, small. None of those things exist in a cyber context. We don't know how to sound an alarm. We wouldn't know what cyber smoke or fire really looked like, or general, the average person. We wouldn't know what the safe route out of a digital building is. We wouldn't know whether we should use use email or not. We wouldn't know when it was safe to go back in the building. None of those things exist. So actually, I think what we've been doing is we've been fundamentally underserving most people. We forced them to use technology and given them none of the tools or the training or the understanding about how to deal with something when it happens. Now, what I think is really actually exciting is that through that period, we've understood the power of information, that fake news has introduced uncertainty and doubt into what we're being told. When everybody got text messages from the Royal Mail about deliveries of packages over the pandemic that was actually phishing attacks, we weren't sure about it. And the introduction of uncertainty and that subtle erosion of trust is probably the key to just taking a moment and thinking, is this something I should be doing? Is this information I should be sharing? Is this a link I should be clicking on, right? And that's, aside from all of the controls we could put in place, for me, it's that moment of uncertainty that an individual can take just to question themselves and think, is this something I should be doing? Just like, is this the point at which I should cross the road? Is this a person I've met on the street that I should be talking to, right? It's just that subtle translation of an analog trust to a digital trust. And that's what I would ask everyone to do. Just take a moment.
Andrzej, in fact, just to add to that, I have customers who actually train their people to count to 5. And I mean 1 crocodile, 2 crocodile before they push it. Because obviously the role and the attacker's goal is to try and get you to click on something quickly because there's added pressure and to do something. To your point, though, I think there's that lovely cartoon, which is Dave in the corner. We've got all the technology over here, and we blame Dave because he did the wrong thing. And back to thinking about that technology, right? I think there's the statistic that says something like 0.7% of the planet creates technology for the other, the rest of the world type of thing. And I think that's the problem, is that as technologists, we've been thinking about technology for technology's sake, as opposed to thinking about, does it actually solve a problem, or even let's think about the humans on the other side of that. So we force people to work in ways that that's not natural to them, and then we blame them for the fact that they did something wrong, right? So again, I want to get back to that, the capability where if somebody does do something wrong, the platform underneath that basically takes care of the problem. And I'm not saying all of the problem, because to your point about context, right? The business context is important, and people would understand what the business context is, and that's what they need to bring to the equation. But not understanding how the technology works, because that's our job.
Of course. And of course, in a culture of remote working, how do you create a more secure environment, especially when you're managing a large team? So suddenly you've got this huge surge in cyber attacks, which have happened particularly over the past 2 years. Lots of people working from home, huge numbers of devices, and then you've also got this kind of cultural mindset where people don't necessarily want to change. Obviously they like working from home, but then there are other practices that need to be adopted. There are things, for example, like maybe getting rid of passwords, et cetera, et cetera. How do you then change the mindset and get them to embrace a new sort of practice?
I think that's an interesting question, because I think, certainly at Microsoft, we have what we refer to as cultural training, but also security training. You go through almost an acceptable use policy type thing, where you're put through different roles, different problems that happen to an individual, so you can get to feel his pain. We had somebody called Nelson, who as a developer actually, he used customer data for some of his tooling, right? And there was this whole thing inside Microsoft. Does he get fired or does he keep his job, right? And that actually helps change the culture of the organization. I think that's key. And I think Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And I agree with that. I think if you're talking about people at home, I think making it easy for them is key, because one of the things we saw was, hey, nobody had any devices to give to their people. So it's bring your own device for a change, But instead of allowing you to use it in a way that you've grown used to and you're comfortable with, we're going to put 9 different agents on it. And then what we're going to do is take all of the traffic you have from a productivity perspective, put it back down on, through the VPN so we can get security optics on it. So it made their lives awful, right? You've got a pandemic, you've got children screaming in the background, you've got dogs barking, and now you've got all of these controls that actually didn't necessarily give you any further more security than you had already. So I know that that's a bunch of what not to do. I'm not sure exactly what the right answer is to do, but I think taking a pause, thinking about it, counting the crocodiles maybe, is at least a step in the right direction. And then thinking about how we build the culture of it. But yes, Joanna, get rid of passwords. We hate them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about what happened, which was, I think, is fascinating. I mean, for us, global network data traffic just went through the roof. And there was a moment, I think, when all of us were sort of crossing our fingers, holding our thumbs, and praying that the network stayed up, because that was the only way we were going to talk to each other or communicate for months. And it did. And it absolutely did. And I think that's a testament to our sort of resilience of tools and video conferencing and actually being able to connect. And then I think people, organizations, and teams made huge sacrifices and compromises to be able to work. And I think we're starting to come out of that state of compromise and resilience to a place of actually, wow, for a long time we were actually left with protecting empty offices, and now we've got to help protect people at home. Now, how do you run an incident response when your people are in their kitchens, not in an incident response room? And we've been able to roll out at phenomenal speed, I think, all of the tools that people would need, collapsing down authentication, data, information sharing, video conferencing onto some just really powerful platforms. So curiously, I think a lot of that problem's gone away. And actually, in that transition from a state of resilience and compromise to a case of now this is here to stay, right? Pandemic, hopefully, may not be here to stay, but mobile and hybrid working will be. And that's a completely supported and enabled way of doing it. I see very few limitations to that now. What I think we need to do is just allow people to take the time, count the crocodiles, but just trust the technology will work for them, because it genuinely will and does.
It's interesting because from a business perspective, obviously we've spoken about from a small person's perspective and then sort of going up the scale. But for businesses that are very data heavy, so for example insurance companies, they've been quite slow to adopt digital transformation technology. And when the pandemic hit, it really caught a lot of them unawares. And so they've spent the last sort of 2 years frantically scrabbling to switch over and move to the cloud. So in that sort of situation, Lesley, what kind of challenges are companies facing when they've got these massive legacy systems and they're trying to transition over? They've got a short period of time in which to do it. They've got a remote workforce that's struggling to embrace this new culture. What are the main challenges that they're facing from a technical side as they're moving their systems over?
I think that's a really good point, because lots of organizations we see stumbled and fell, right, purely because they were trying to do too much too soon with too little. So I think it's really worthwhile thinking about what you've got, taking those small steps, working through, obviously, towards a framework, or we talked about zero trust, which I don't like, as you know, but the ability to think about, these are the steps I need to take in my journey to get more secure. And it's not about implementing tooling, which is certainly something we see during incident response, is because people feel that tools potentially close gaps, and so they deploy tools without thinking about the fact that they've got to operate it, they've got to understand what this thing is actually showing them. So for me, it's just about making sure that your strategy, having a strategy is a good thing, but that strategy, you're starting with the small wins instead of trying to boil the ocean or eat the elephant or whichever analogy you want to use in that case.
I think we genuinely believe that the use of cloud-based technologies and SaaS platforms is inherently more secure than everybody trying to do their own thing and look after it. Now, that is a really powerful statement because for many years, the single largest impediment to cloud adoption was a security concern. I just don't see that. And I see, actually, you talk about data-heavy or data-centric organizations. I hesitate to see any organization that isn't data-heavy and data-centric now. But I think part of that transformation that people often forget is that just because you're moving to an inherently safer, more secure platform where amazing organizations will look after some of the basics for you, doesn't mean you still don't have to do the basics of security on the data, the applications, the access, and the people. So the essentials, the fundamentals of security still lie with you as an organization and still need to be applied, even if it is in a better managed, more robust, more resilient, and more connected environment. And I think that's a really important point. You don't abdicate responsibility when you ask somebody else to look after that, that environment for you. For me, that's the biggest thing that people forget. Mm-hmm. They put it in the cloud or they use a SaaS service and they don't really internalize that they're still responsible for the access to data and how it's used. And I think that's the one caution I would ask everybody. I think we can solve the transformation, the translation, the migration issues. And the platforms are inherently stronger and more stable and robust and looked after by better trained, better funded professionals. You never give up ownership of your data and responsibility for how your people use it.
Do you know what? And that is a great point. And I think we in the industry, again, have perhaps made that a little bit uncertain or unclear to people because, there's that shared responsibility model. So it always looks like if you've got a SaaS application, that's fine, then the vendor looks after everything. But to your point, you can't abrogate your responsibility for your data, and you can't do that for your identities either. So if you don't protect your identities, then, and again, those identities, whether they're carbon or silicon, require access to data.
Value, and I love the password thing. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to it. But when a user can access data, they can create value. When they can't,
there's no value.
Value is either created, delayed, or destroyed. That's exactly what cybercriminals are trying to do. Is steal value, steal data, or destroy or delay it. That's what a ransomware attack, right? It's exactly that. So everything that brings a user and data together creates value and makes it easier. Anything that stands in the way of that delays or destroys that value creation. In fact, as a fundamental business process or value chain, I think we forget that. We think in terms of tools and responsibilities at times. I do, we all do. But if I look at our customers, and large, mature, well-funded organizations have large, mature, and well-funded security teams, they know what they're doing. Right? Small organizations don't. They really don't, and they don't know the choices they can make or even how to turn on all the amazing security features that are built into the Microsoft stack, which is phenomenal and getting better every day.
Thank you.
It's so cool.
It's all my fault.
It is so cool. But they don't understand how to do that. But deep down, your people accessing using data creates value. Think about that. Allow them to have the best and most transparent use of passwords, of access, of authentication, and give them the best tools.
So moving on to authentication, obviously we're seeing a lot more biometric technology, but there is a resistance to that kind of culturally in terms of giving over that personal information. I remember reading an article in The Guardian over the new MasterCard Wave to Pay program, and a privacy expert said, well, you can change your password, but you can't change your face. So that it wants, so in that way, I think there is a certain amount of fear when it comes to biometric authentication, but what else are we supposed to do if passwords are simply too comparable? And what's your take on biometric authenticity? Lesley.
Okay, because you could see me jumping around.
I did.
I've heard that before, right? And I think the difference is it's the same as when we have a password. We use a hash of the password. We don't use the actual password itself. That was, went out with the dark ages. They had computers in the dark ages. But this is exactly the same with biometrics. So the fact is you're taking a hash of your biometric, not the biometric itself. So if somebody compromises that, it's easy to take another hash, right? But I think, again, back to the doom and the gloom from the point of view of the security industry, right? I don't know if you remember, there was a story where somebody was using their thumbprint on a car. I won't mention which manufacturer, but essentially this is how he got access into his car and how he started his car. So they chopped his thumb off to be able to get into the car. And at that point, biometrics become something, I'd rather give them the car, frankly, than my thumb, right? But I think we've moved on from that so dramatically. Do you remember the gummy bear story with your thumbprints, right? You could use a gummy bear. But I think the human-centeredness of that, the human-centric, human-led design, which is you're using something that is natural to humans, a gesture, or you're looking at something. It's so powerful. And honestly, we have statistics that would knock passwords into cocked hats if we could just get people to passwords. And honestly, as I said before, there's nobody I know has come to me and actually complained about the fact that they don't use passwords anymore.
No. I think we've left that I'm scared of people stealing my face and using my identity against us behind. The number of smartphones in the world, the number and level of digital adoption, the things that we all do, I think people just are using their fingerprints and their faces to access the world through their phones and their devices. I think we've lost that fear, genuinely, or given it up, right? One of the two, but either way, what people still aren't able to do is then manage the passwords. So they understand the concept of unlocking something. We all have a key to our home, most of us do. And we fumble around, we find it, and we put it in and we turn it, and that unlocks the door to our home. And I think people understand that concept. But it's the hotel analogy. You don't need a different key or a different card for every room in your house. You don't need a different key or a password or a way of unlocking every application or data source you use. That's the bit we need to train. And I think just the single phase, the biometric, the single thing. And then, as we do, the second you notice element of change behavior or fraud, you step it up and you ask them for something they know or something they have. And then you get into the second or the multi-factor or the authentication, and it really works. I think we're going to get there. We'll get there really quickly, and it will be consumer-led because people love and are just engaged with that frictionless way of transacting and opening their phones. And they intuitively aren't willing to fumble around for the key in their pocket to unlock the door to their phone. They just want it to go because they want to pay their parking or they want to to access a service or send an email. So I think we've moved on from people stealing faces and identities.
So good things are happening.
Yeah.
We often hear so much bad news about cyber. This many attacks and it's gone up this far, and this has been stolen, another breach at a big company, and it's all quite depressing. So really, what are the good things that are happening that are getting you ahead of the curve in terms of combating the crime and just keeping safe, really? Lesley. We'll go for you, Lesley, yeah?
Okay, I'll go first. No, you go first while I think about it.
Okay.
Yeah. If I think about the three big things that are causing us pain, uncertainty, and real challenge, right? We have an accelerating curve of a relentless and dynamic adversary. It's not going away. Right? We are in an asymmetric position where they will always have the advantage and can recognize and use brutal innovation to target all of us. Like, on the face of it, that's a sort of a worrying state of affairs. Yet, we understand them better. We're putting in building and security inherently within workflows. And when we talk about and think about the fact that we're even talking about passwordless use and access to data. It means we're making a step change at the single most vulnerable point in that kill chain, which is the individual. And the introduction of uncertainty and that subtle erosion of trust is brilliant for that. Because the people in the process are the most important first line of defense, not the weakest link. So that's, I think we are actually closing that gap. We'll never entirely close it, but I think it's flowing down and across society, and we're getting better at it day by day, year by year. And the second big thing, which introduces uncertainty and causes concern, is again, massive acceleration in the use and adoption of technology. Back to it's very hard to actually, book swimming, book a medical appointment, engage with your doctor, learn and do anything without engaging in a digital way rather than an analog way. Now, what that's doing is that is accelerating our understanding and behavior of those technologies individually right across society. So again, whilst we're introducing new technologies at a faster rate, we force that thing to happen quickly. And I think that gives us huge hope for the future, because we're now starting to learn and play with technologies rather than just adopt them. Because that adoption path could have gone on for 10 years, and we just shortcut the entire thing globally, which is just amazing. And then the final piece is, I think, less optimistic. Businesses in particular, and I think individuals, are facing a real challenge around what privacy means, where data is trusted and where it isn't, how we regulate industries, how we regulate security and data. And I think that's the one area that everybody's working really hard on. And you see the number of new standards, regimes, regulatory advice, guidelines, and laws that are coming into place right around the world. So we're rapidly trying to fix the issue, and it's lovely that governments have woken up to that. But it's still very fragmented, very disjointed, and a little balkanized in places. So actually knowing what the true path is quite difficult. And yet, I think we are, representative to massive global companies, orders of magnitude better at sharing best practice and rolling out industrial standards, not government standards. And as a result, we're shortcutting the lag on institutional regulation for practical best practice in technology. And that's a really, that's a sort of a subtle moment of optimism, because I think we recognize I'm not going to wait for the EU to actually finally agree with with the US and everybody else what an information standard should be. We're going to have to work it out between us, and we are doing, and that's really nice.
So do you ever think we'll sort of get to the point where we've got the World Health Organization looking after certain things that happen globally, that we'll have the same sort of organization taking care of cyber? Is it because our world has become so digitally integrated now that anything that happens online that is a threat, that potentially it can affect so many people, it is very serious. So what are your thoughts on that?
I suspect we're at a fork in the road, and I'm not entirely sure which way it will go. Either we will, and possibly industry-led, genuinely start to think about the importance of data and trust and digital interaction as a global society, because we all, to some extent, we all use the same tools, no matter where we are. And a UN Cyber Security Council or Data Security Council would be possibly more influential or powerful as a way of, consolidating that view. But I suspect, as we've seen through the pandemic, World Health Organization can give insight and expert views, but it will still be up to individual countries about how they choose to respond to that. And we're still seeing, aren't we, very different responses to that. The other fork in the path is that it becomes increasingly balkanized and weaponized, and different approaches and ethical standards mean that we treat information and freedoms and privacy in different ways. I can see both of those things happening. I suspect if we rely on a single global institution with a common set of values and ethics, we may not see that in the short term.
Lesley, what do you...
Yeah, I can't see that happening anytime soon, right? There's too many different flavors and cultures and things like that. So from my perspective, right, the doom and the gloom, right? Let's move beyond that. I think for the first time with the scale of the cloud, we can certainly see, talk about OODA loops, right? But we can certainly see the speed with which we're detecting the attackers. As you say, it's going to be one of those things that we're just going to keep on doing things. But I think for us, the fact that nation states are getting involved in this, and whether you're talking about it from a criminal opportunity to make money because now there's sanctions against me, and so I need to try and make money in other ways. It's something that is really concerning because we have a Geneva Convention for physical warfare, kinetic warfare as we call it. Now we see it being a branch between the physical and the digital. So we're 100% behind having a digital Geneva Convention, which says just because you can target, people or critical national infrastructure, you shouldn't, or you should be held to the same level of accountability as if you're doing it through a physical war, which we're going through at the moment, right?
Exactly. Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time right now. I will take one question from the floor. Does anybody have anything they'd like to? Yes. Can we have? Sorry, yeah. We need a mic. Here we go. Can you have my mic? There we are.
Mic.
Yeah, we'll need it back in a minute.
Right. So hi, I'm Josh. I was wondering. So in the middle of that, you mentioned when companies are beginning to transition to cloud deployments, SaaS, etc., how there's that perception that, okay, let's say we go at Microsoft, conveniently, we'll just let them deal with the security, it's fine. Just why is that view pervasive and sort of higher up in companies? Why do some companies sort of don't see the need to bother with, say, IAM, protecting our identity management for like a life cycle? Why do you think that is the case, and what needs to change to stop companies from thinking in that way?
Thank you.
I think large organizations, large global organizations or advanced technology organizations don't hold that view. As you step down, and there's a really interesting ratio, so I think there's sort of, in general, one IT person for every 100 employees, and there's one security person for every 10 IT people. So an organization with 1,000 people, which is sizable and probably has, huge, may have one security person. Now, there's also, I think, there's a physical and an emotional proximity. If you give your servers to somebody else, which is what the cloud is, you don't feel you have to do the things that you used to do to them. And actually, you still do. Because all you're doing is moving the location, you're not shifting the responsibility. So I think it's both the level of talent and expertise that exists in smaller organizations, but also the idea that when you move it, you don't abdicate responsibility. And I think those two things compound, and to some extent are mitigated by some amazing professionals and cloud vendors. I don't know what you say.
I would just add to that, Josh, that there's a perception, isn't there? And as a incident responder with many years of living on customers' couches, it's a perception of control. So you used a very interesting word, trust, and that's difficult to quantify because if somebody says, I feel something, it's much more difficult than to approach that than a bunch of metrics, for example. But yes, I think, you've hit the nail on the head there, Andrzej. I think that there's just not enough people to be able to go around. And there is that perception of control that we kind of have to think about, but to that trust, trusting that it's going to be okay. I'm not going to abrogate your responsibility, but the fact that they have got the capabilities, so the people, the process, the technology, and the information with the context to be able to help solve the problem, to help augment or amplify you as an organization. Make more sense?
I'm always reminded of the analogy. It's the difference between owning a car and hiring a car. You're still responsible for putting the seatbelts on and not driving into stuff. You just don't have to do the maintenance and insurance. Right?
Yep, that's a very good analogy. And on that point, I'd like to say a big thank you to our two speakers today. If we can just, thank you very much. Lesley and Andrzej. Okay.